So today we will discuss with next topic, that is clutch. So for that purpose, I want to share my screen. So this is our syllabus, and necessity and selection of clutch is the today's topic for discussion. So let me check whether sharing is available or not. Okay, so there's clutches. If we see the clutch is a mechanical device that facilitates the transmission of power and motion from one component to the another. That is driving member towards the driven member when engaged, with a provision for disengagement whenever required. Actually, vehicle is in engaged condition. That is, engine and transmission system is always in contact with each other. Okay, and while if we want to change the gear or shift the gear, we disengage this system, and after that we shift the gear, and then we'll again engage this. Okay, so whenever we apply the clutch, at that time we separate the engagement of transmission system and engine. Okay, when we apply the clutch pedal, then engine is in working condition, but the gearbox gets disengaged from the engine. So the speed in gears becomes stop, but engine is continuously running. Okay, so this is the function of that clutch. In the simplest application, clutches connect and disconnect two rotating coaxial shafts. One shaft is attached to a power unit, that is driving member, while the other shaft, the driven member, provides output power for work. The motions involved are rotary in nature. If we see the purpose, a clutch is designed with the following requirements. It allows the vehicle to come to stop while the transmission remains in gear. Allow the driver to smoothly take off from a dead stop, and it also allows the driver to smoothly changes the gears. Must be able to transmit the power and torque without slipping. So if vehicle is in running condition, and if we want to change the gear, and if we not applied the clutch pedal, then lot of jerks may take place and vehicle gets stopped. Types of clutches: two different types of clutches are available, that is positive clutch and friction clutch. Mainly, friction clutch is again classified into three different types, that is plate or disc clutch, then cone clutch, centrifugal clutch. This plate or disc clutch is again sub-classified into two types, that is single plate clutch and multi-plate clutch. If we see the types of clutch according to the conditions, so wet clutch and dry clutch, these are the two different types available. Wet clutch is immersed in a cooling lubricating fluid which also keeps the surfaces clean and gives smoother performance and longer life. Wet clutches, however, tend to lose some energy to the liquid. If we see the dry clutch, as the name implies, is not bathed in fluid and runs dry. Clutch turns. Clutch disengage, that is clutch pedal press. When we press the pedal, then clutch gets disengaged. The clutch is disengaged when at the starting the engine, then shifting the gear, stopping the vehicle, and idling the engine. Clutch engage at the time of clutch pedal is released. When we release the clutch pedal, then clutch is again in engaged position. Construction of automobile single plate clutch. If we see this diagram, this is the separate views of the components which is involved in single plate clutch. This is the flywheel, then this is the pilot bushing or bearing in center of flywheel or crankshaft, supports the end of the input shaft. This is the clutch disc. This is the friction disc that is plied to transmission input shaft. This is pressure plate, release bearing. Throughout bearing allows to push on the rotating clutch fingers. This is the release fork. Okay, so this is related to single plate clutch. If we see the components, the primary component becomes flywheel, then clutch disc. See here, this is the flywheel which is in yellow color, then clutch disc which is in green color here, then clutch cover is available, then this is the release bearing, clutch release bearing hub, this is the clip, okay, this is also clip, clutch release fork, all these are the components. Single plate clutch working, the diagram shows the pressure plate. See here, sorry, this is the pressure plate. So it pulls back by the release levers against the compression spring so that the friction lining on the clutch plate are free of flywheel and pressure plate. The flywheel rotates without the driving the clutch plate and hence the shaft. When the pressure of the thrust race is released, the compression spring are free to move the pressure plate to the left, bringing it in contact with the clutch plate. The pressure plate moves to the left, sliding the clutch plate on its spline hub along the driven shaft until the friction lining touches the flywheel. The compression spring now causes the linings to be gripped between the pressure plate and the flywheel, and the friction between the linings and flywheel and pressure plate cause the clutch plate to revolve, turning the driven shaft. If we see this diagram, this is the flywheel, then this is the clutch plate, engine shaft, friction linings are there, helical spring is there, stud is available, release lever, thrust race moved by clutch pedal mechanism. These are the splines. Splines are used for motion in axial direction. This is driven shaft, then spline hub and cover. This is the pressure plate. If we see the flywheel attached to the crankshaft flange, this flywheel is attached to the crankshaft flange. Mass is used to store the energy here and has a machine surface on which the clutch disc is connects. Has a ring gear on its circumference and pressure plate is bolted to the flywheel. If we see the flywheel runout is also provided, that is standard values become 0.05 millimeter and service limit is 0.15 millimeter. This is the ring gear, this is the flywheel and dial indicator. Clutch disc, that is the friction plate is clutch disc, that is friction disc is also available here. Line on both sides with a friction lining similar to brake pads. Various materials have been used for the disc friction facings, including asbestos in the past. Modern clutches typically use a compound organic resin with copper wire facing or a ceramic material, which is used here. The coefficient of friction is 0.35 for organic and 0.25 for ceramic material. Ceramic materials are typically used in heavy applications such as trucks carrying large loads or racings. That is, hub is connected to the input shaft of the transmission with spline. Friction linings are separated by the springs. The springs allow the lining to slip while engaging and disengaging. Friction linings are connected to the central hub by torsional damping springs, which helps to dampen the shock and isolate the engine vibrations. This is the friction disc. This is the actual view of friction disc. See here, these are the springs. Then this is the disc, friction disc. Friction disc, often made of asbestos, must be put in only one way, usually marked. Okay. So marking is provided and from that only this friction disc is mounted. This is again friction disc. If we see here, these are the torsional springs and this is the cover, and can be torsional spring can be spring or rubber, dampen power impulses from crankshafts. Okay, for damping purpose it is used. Torsional springs have pins to limit amount of twist. Spring try to keep it centered between the pins. Then friction disc cushion springs, wound metal between clutch holes, dampen the clutch engagement. Pressure plate, see this diagram is the pressure plate, and this is the clutch housing, diaphragm spring. Pressure plate applies the pressure to the clutch disc by squeezing the clutch disc between itself and the flywheel. Allow the clutch disc to release when vehicle is stopped or driver is shifting the gear. If we see the component in this pressure plate, the cover, then pressure spring, then roller is provided. Okay, this is the plate, pressure plate, then pins, eye bolt, release lever is provided, and strut is provided here. Then if we see the checking of this pressure plate, okay, so if we uh, pass the rod, circular rod on this pressure plate, then we are able to find out the warpage if any present there. So diaphragm spring is also provided. See this diagram. So diaphragm spring is provided. Then diaphragm spring clutch is provided. This is the diagram for that. Mechanical diaphragm cone clutch is also available there. This is again another type of clutch. Then clutch release bearing is available there. So it transmits the movement of the clutch linkage to the pressure plate. Is usually a ball or roller type of bearing, and it is self-centering to components for clutch alignment variances. Okay, so this is the ball bearing, as balls are provided, so it is ball bearing, and hubs are provided, outer bearing shell is there. Okay, and throughout bearing is also available here. So this is the release bearing, it is also called as release bearing. Slides on transmission input shaft bearing trainer. This is the clutch fork. Then clutch linkages are also there. A clutch linkage mechanism uses levers and rods to transmit the motion from the clutch pedal to the clutch fork. When the pedal is pressed, a push rod pushes the bell crank and the bell crank reverses the forward movement of the clutch pedal. The other end of the bell crank is connected to the release rod. The release rod transfers bell crank movement to the clutch fork. It also provides a method of adjustment for the clutch. Then that is clutch linkage, right amount of movement and direction without too much pedal pressure. Okay, and then less wear is for less wear we provide this spring to pull the bearing away has to be lubricated. So all this is related to clutch linkages. If we see, this is the clutch pedal, this is the pivot point, this is also pivot point, one rod is connected there, this is again the same. Then clutch fork is provided, this is again pivot point. What is this pivot point? Pivot point is that point about which the movement takes place, that is called as pivot point. In this case, this is the pivot point and this is the clutch fork. Okay, so movement of clutch release, the bearing. So then cable clutch. Cable clutch is also provided. There is no complicated linkages and flexibility. These are the features in this cable clutch. Okay, so these are the components. If we see this diagram, the return spring is available there, shift fork, ball stud is available, pressure plate assembly is there, then driven plate is available, release bearing assembly, clutch control cable. All this is related to this clutch. The next is the clutch cable mechanism uses a steel cable inside a flexible housing to transfer the pedal movement to the clutch fork. The cable is usually fastened to the upper end of the clutch pedal with the other end of the cable connecting to the clutch fork. The cable housing is mounted in a stationary position. This allows the cable to slide inside the housing whenever the clutch pedal is moved. One end of the clutch cable housing has a threaded sleeve for the clutch adjustment. This is the hydraulic clutch. It uses the master cylinder and slave cylinder. It uses the brake fluid and its need bleeding. Hydraulic clutch, no complicated linkage, and it can easily control mechanical advantage with piston sizes, and servicing is similar to hydraulic brakes. Multiplate clutch is also available. So it used when large torque is to be transmitted from, for example, heavy vehicles and machine tools. Then compact construction is required, for example, scooters and motorcycles. In this case, this multiplate clutch is used. This is the diagram related to multi-plate clutch, as the number of plates are used here, that is, which is greater than single plate, and so it is called as multi-plate clutch. Clutch is also available. It consists of a flywheel and a cone mounted on driving and driven shaft respectively. The shape of the side of the flywheel facing the cone is as to accommodate the cone readily when the clutch is engaged. If we see the shape of the cone, both the shapes are conical shape and male and female part is there. Okay, so whenever the vehicle is in running condition, then both these parts gets in engaged condition, and when we apply the that lever, then it gets separate out. The surface of contact are lined with friction lining, that is asbestos leather material is used. The cone can be disengaged from the flywheel by mechanism which operates the groove of the cone. This is the diagram of cone clutch. There is semi-apex angle of the cone is alpha, and this is the angle alpha. Only one pair of driving surfaces in position, that is n is equal to 1. This is the friction lining, and this is driven shaft, this is driving shaft. Maximum torque T is equal to mu into W into Rm into cosec A. This is the relation for finding out the maximum torque transmitted. Cone clutch, the only advantage of this clutch is that the normal force acting on the friction surface is greater than the axial force as compared to the single plate clutch, in which the normal force acting on the frictional surface is equal to the axial force. Okay, so the cone clutch is practically obsolete due to the following disadvantage. If the cone angle is made smaller than 20 degree, the cones tend to by bend, and it is difficult to disengage the clutch. A small amount of wear on the cone surface results in considerable amount of the axial movement of the cone, which is difficult to compensate. And this is the diagram related to centrifugal clutch. This is the total friction torque, that is T is equal to N into mu into R into F minus P. This is the formula for calculating this total friction torque. Okay, this is the radius R. This is the P, that is force applied in radially in inward direction. This is F, that is acting in radially outward direction. F is equal to mr into omega square. Omega is the angular speed, and this is driven shaft, this is driving shaft. All this is related to this centrifugal clutch. Centrifugal clutch, the faster the RPM, more is the force on the clutch disc. This is the principle used in centrifugal clutch. Then clutch safety switch, it prevents from cranking with clutch engagement. Okay, so in this way, these are the types of clutches which we already see today. Okay, so different types of clutches are available. I already discussed that. That is single plate and multi-plate clutches are there. Then a lot of applications are available in automobile, as well as different types of industries. These clutches are used. Okay, and the basic principle is that whenever the vehicle is in running condition, then always this clutches becomes in engaged condition. That is, this clutch is provided in between the engine and the gearbox. Okay, so whenever we want to shift the gear, then we apply the clutch pedal, and as we apply the clutch pedal, then disengagement takes place. That is, engine is in running condition, but gearbox is in stationary condition, and at that time we are easily shift the gears. Okay, so this is the main feature in case of the clutch operation. So today we'll stop here. Thank you.